ROSECODE is an interactive cyberpunk thriller. We'll talk about that and get a little bit more into that as we go on. If you guys haven't checked out the site yet, I urge you to go there, draw your own conclusions. But that's only part of the talk. The other talk is really much more about an economic model and about creating a fair and open way to reward creators and just build a better system than the advertising-based media system that we're living with right now. So these are both like ambitious and huge topics, and we're only going to get so far in 45 minutes. What I did, thinking ahead, is to create this little Twitter poll so you can actually go online and vote for which topic you'd like to hear more about, or as we go through and we get to the Q&A time, just show of hands, or if you have a particular question, let me know. I'm going to try to just cover a lot of material, but leave the last third of this fairly open, and you can sort of direct where you want the flow of the conversation to go. Without further ado, and can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Yeah. What is ROSECODE? This is a brief excerpt. The year is 2267. The setting is Neo-Seattle, a dazzling futuristic city built a few miles inland from the site of the tragic Seattle earthquake and mostly extinct volcano. Genetic engineering, hormone therapy, and neural implants are used to engineer social control and harmony. The most common neural implant is known as the chip. It is an artificial symbiote embedded into the brainstem of children before age 6. Once pairing has occurred, the chip cannot be safely removed or swapped out. What is ROSECODE? The chip may give its host special abilities, such as the ability to interface directly with electronic equipment and data systems. It may give you better abilities in math and science, or it may function as a glorified cell phone and help you get around future Paris or wherever you are. Everyone believes that the chip, to some degree, allows the authority to read human thoughts. As a result, revolution seems impossible, even though many feel they are suffocating in this safe and comfortable world. So that's sort of a lot of the backdrop. It connects to a lot of present themes with how technology, particularly mobile devices, have changed the way we think and interact and the degree to which we're surveilled. And it should be fairly familiar as sets of plot elements go, but hopefully rearranged in a somewhat new way. What is ROSECODE? The year is 2185. The setting is Newport, New Jersey, just across the river from New York City. Tim decides to stay up late on a work night. He's playing a game. And that's sort of the main plot thread. It's kind of boy meets girl adventure. Again, it has some twists and some surprises. What is ROSECODE? The year is 2022, near future, just 4 years in our future. Old friends meet for drinks. The conversation turns to a film project, canceled under mysterious circumstances. And this is sort of where the story begins. So there's an interweaving across a large span of history. You can already see this is an ambitious project, and it's really bigger than just one book or movie or short story. It's a universe, basically. Take it, leave it. It's a universe to be filled in. I'm going to share some artwork. These are by an artist who goes by the name of Noel NZA. You can find him on Instagram. He's got a website. He did a really good job creating a unique aesthetic. Some of the illustrations fit very tightly with the plot. This one, for example, you'd have to get in that plot to understand the significance of the zebra. Others are much more atmospheric. Then I was lucky enough to have another artist with much more of a graphic, comic style joint. He goes by the name of Red Sticks, and his work, again, to me, I was just really struck by how two people could take the same themes and the same characters and go in such different directions. Very action-oriented, very graphic novelistic in its style, and incredibly fun stuff. These are just a few of the images, and more will be coming. It's right now my job is figuring out the best way to assemble and curate and share what people have created to date. And again, these I'm sharing these without a lot of detail about the plot. If people have questions about what exactly is going on, we can delve a little bit into that without too many spoilers. And finally, the name of the project is ROSECODE. We're here at LinuxFest. You may be wondering, what about the code? What's going on with the code? This seems, if you've taken a look at the repo, it's a mostly static repository. And my answer to that is there are some interesting Easter eggs. There are some actual codes that are hidden within the source of the site for those who take the time to look. There are some clues. If anybody finds the first one, post it onto social media, and there will be more. Part of my idea with pulling together this material, and there are several authors of the material, I'm not the only one, was that people consume media differently on an electronic stream than in book form or even in movie or television format. And just thinking, what are the ways in which you can make something more interactive, give people more challenges if they're curious to find out what happened or advance to the next set of the story. People browse through electronic media in a different way than they would read a novel typically. They tend to graze more, but also to come back to the same material. So we wanted to create an experience that would intentionally shift and change over time, where you could come back from one week to the next and find just new elements of this world and new elements of the story. Sum it all up. It's a dystopian future. Everybody has a chip in the back of their neck. It has some funny bits. It has multiple storylines. In many ways, the inspiration for this project was Black Mirror and just the idea of an anthology show or an anthology work. And I would say for anybody who has kids or might be watching this on the internet, it is mildly an NSFW. I'd say it's about equivalent to PG-13. There is some language. There are some situations and some violence that are described, but it's we're also working to make it tasteful, and I don't want anybody to confuse it with something that's extremely graphic or designed for other purposes, because that's not what it is. Art today has been by two artists. You've seen some of their work. They're extremely talented. We have about 8 contributors total. I'd say half of those are on the creative side and half of those are on the development and tech side. I'm sort of in the middle. I do both, and my thankless job also gets to be to coordinate everything and try to produce it. And hence this model. ROSECODE is an open franchise for creators. This term, you can also say open creative franchise. I like the acronym OFC. I think it rolls off the tongue. And what is an OFC? It's a very old idea that's been repackaged for an age of technology. It's a legal economic framework enabling creators from different disciplines to work together on shared projects in the commons. ROSECODE is one example of an OFC. It's basically a shared universe or a shared mythos. You can go way back and you can find others really from the dawn of human history. I say the Bible, but you could say Gilgamesh. You've got myths from every world culture. That's Shiva just hanging out there, had to pick some mythological figure. Fairy tales, Dracula, Shakespeare. What's interesting is there is this cutoff after 1923 where works, no matter how popular they are, whether the author is living or dead, they stop automatically going into the public domain. And so the result is that we as a culture, we as a species, no longer have a way to access our myths and access this shared framework. There are exceptions. SCP is a very popular electronic fandom, and many stories have been produced. A game has also been produced. My understanding is that their rights framework would fit very squarely in the definition of an open franchise for creators. They're not calling it that, but people who want to be part of the SCP project have to subscribe to a certain set of guidelines about what will be released and what under what license. Creepypasta is very similar in its spirit, and I think it's bigger and better known. It's also more generic, and you can release a creepypasta story under any sort of license. So again, that's why it fits the definition, but I'd say it's a little bit mushier. What doesn't fit into that entire list? All of fandom. All of the I'm a science fiction fan. These are just, a small sampling of the number of franchises that you could list. Star Trek, Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, Doctor Who, Game of Thrones. A franchise doesn't have to be speculative fiction. The Gilmore Girls would be another great example. General Hospital. Anything with a shared world, a backstory, a setting, characters where people can sort of tune in at different points, figure out what's going on, and there can be side plots and side stories. It's more than a single plot about a single character, it's a world. And there is a really rich and diverse fan community around these worlds. I went to my first science fiction con, I think when I was 14 years old, to hear Dean Stockwell speak of Star of Quantum Leap. It's, there's so much creativity and there's so much community in these spaces, but at the same time, they're completely separate from the actual production of content in almost all cases. There's just a wall that can't be breached between who has the legal rights to the story and what you do in your spare time as a hobby. And there have been cases, it's actually, I believe, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, somebody was sued for a Halloween costume where they dressed up as one of the Power Rangers and posted the picture on Instagram. These measures are extreme, but you sort of never know what's going to happen. That image up there is it's a mashup that a friend of mine made between Doctor Who and Stranger Things, just reinterpreting the intro. It's a cool little piece. I would love to show it to you. I actually can't because I'm not sure that it fits under fair use. So that, that's sort of the world in which we live. We have these tools, we have all of this great material, but we don't have the legal ability to remix or reinterpret or reframe. If you do these things, probably nobody's going to come in the middle of the night and take you away, but you might get fined. Might get fined a lot of money. And if you share a link and share too widely, very likely somebody gets a cease and desist order and the party's over. Something goes away. A friend sent me this really neat ASCII art remake of the Star Wars movies last night. Many of you probably have seen it. It's hilarious. It's great. I'm like, I don't even want to know where it is or share that because, again, that is, technically and legally a violation of copyright and of the ownership rights of the Star Wars franchise, so it could get taken down. And we tend to think of our consumption of culture as very personal. Like, I don't know how many people in this room torrent. I think everybody has probably downloaded an illegal file or listened to a piece of music or movie through extra legal means at some point. That we tend to think of that as just very much our personal private consumption of media. What we don't think about is our ability to create new work. And that's where I really see a gag order. Because there aren't mechanisms for people who want to share their work and would like to have more freedom to get it out there and to collaborate with more people. That's very difficult the way the media and entertainment economy works at the present time. Example, Ready Player One. How many people in this room saw that movie? Okay, many of you. How many read the book? About the same. I saw the movie, I read the book. Book is usually better than the movie, not always. It really bothered me how much of many of the references were changed. If you know the story at all, it's all about pop culture references, from the 80s on, and they're very significant. It's not like you sort of throw a pin and pick something. They pertain to the characters, they pertain to the world. And what you got with the movie, as far as I could tell, was, well, we don't have the rights to Joust, but we do have the rights to Shining and Chucky, so we're just going to swap that in. Nobody will notice. Nobody will care. And again, it's this idea of content as commodity, which I think is a byword for crappy content. So no further comments on the movie. It had its moments, some more than once. And again, I would love to play for you an Offspring song, which has the line, "You've got to keep them separated." I won't be doing that. Too bad. You can listen to it on your own time. Instead, I will have a brief commercial for this really wonderful and important organization. I suspect the majority of people in this room are developers. If you are looking for a way to collaborate with designers and creative people from any field, go here. Go to the open source design net. I have stickers, I have their cards. I got some of those in FOSDEM earlier in the year. There are great resources out there in the FOSS world for programmers who want to work with designers, and bring them into open source projects. There are a lot of people with UX and usability experience who would like to be part of these projects. At the same time, my feeling as somebody who's enthusiastically collaborated on a lot of projects and sometimes been that bridge person is there's often a gap. And it's often, some of it is cultural, some of it is just process related, and when you get people into the room together. My feeling is that having more creative projects, which include artists, writers, and programmers from the get-go, and doing that within the context of free software and Libre culture would lead to a much more vibrant community where these ties already existed. My feeling is, why not have the next jobs in Wozniak come from the open source world? It could happen. Those people are out there. Those men and women exist. It's just that they don't know who each other are or have an easy way of connecting. So in addition to lists and forums like open source design, just creating more spaces where people can come together informally on small and indie projects and just work to build cool stuff, rather than this idea that you have to be funded and you have to have maybe $50,000 in the bank before you go out and hire an agency. It's nothing against multimedia agencies and interactive agencies, but it's very different when you bring in designers and UX professionals as another class of professionals, rather than as collaborators and founders. So that, I think that's part of the relevance of this idea.
part of it is also just people who go around with worlds inside their heads and want to build something neat and interesting that nobody else has built yet. But I think it sort of connects to the broader world of software development as well. And something I've written about and referenced in the description of the talk, we don't hear this described much, but I would argue if you look at the actual economic value of FOSS, and if you count cryptocurrency as part of that, as people absolutely should, you're getting up around the 400 billion, 500 billion mark. That's very significant. It's like 400 galloping unicorns, like all in a big herd, coming straight towards you. It's a lot of value. If you look at the tech economy and the way that software is written, every language is open source, nearly every framework and library. The current system that produces all of this speculative wealth and all of this wealth in the stock market could not exist without these underpinnings. So I don't think it's by accident. I think you can actually credit the existence of free software as a store of capital with the tech boom that we've experienced, over the last decade and a half. The metaphor I used in my piece for Hacker Noon, imagine just going into a hardware store and being able to walk away with some doors, some windows, some countertops, a fridge, a microwave. Maybe you need to work with somebody else to do the wiring. Maybe there's something very specialized you have to order, but by and large, if you have the skills, the raw materials are there and waiting to be assembled. To me, that's an incredibly powerful system, and it's a win-win. It's a win for everyone. It's a win for Wall Street. It's a win for communists. It's a win for everyone in between. And what's notable to me is that we do not have that system for free culture, by and large. There is an ever-growing number of works that are licensed under the Creative Commons license, but it's really not a framework for group projects or libraries or repositories. It's a framework for individual works. So there's no way to connect to other people who might have very similar interests or might be working in the same art form or the same genre. I don't know, and again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. Don't quote me on this. I do not believe there's a way to, for instance, write and produce a play and just use the existing point-and-click format, the existing licenses to cover all of that work and to put it into the commons. And most media projects are collaborative in this day and age. Like the image of the lone writer working away in their garret, that's kind of a thing of the past. Writing is typically seen as the first stage in developing a property, and writers are strongly encouraged to sell their work for pennies on the dollar. And unless you happen to write a bestseller off the get-go, and it helps to also have connections in film and television, i.e., unless you write the Harry Potter books, unless you're Rowling or unless you're George R.R. Martin, and he was a screenwriter at the same time as he was a novelist, it's unusual for artists to have much or any creative control when their works enter into other forms. So that's one of the areas where I really see a framework like the Open Franchise for Creators being a real win for anybody with an idea or a story in their heads, just being able to stay involved with the process and choose the people that they work with. They might not get as big a check, they might get a bigger check. It's hard to say, but you don't lose out, you don't get cut out of that process at an early stage. So the solution for ROSECODE, and this really just started as a summer project, and then it keeps on growing. Hopefully it will continue to keep on growing. We didn't have the budget to hire an attorney and draft something custom. And if we had, we probably would have preferred that those funds go back to the artists and the people working on the project anyway. Instead, what we've adapted is a tiered structure where actually the rights and what is free for reuse and under what terms expand over time with the art form. The first tier is just completing the story and making it available as a Creative Commons licensed ebook. The second tier would be releasing the story in game form under a non-commercial derivative works license. The third tier would be releasing it in movie form, but at the same time as we released our movie, saying anybody else is also free to make their own movie or their own comic, their own song, what have you, based on the same material. And why build in those protections? And I want to make very clear, like, anybody who wants can copy and repost what's on the ROSECODE site right now. If you want to use the artwork as a screensaver, you can do that. But at the same time, there are restrictions. If you're interested in working on a fork of the project, if you have ideas, if you'd like to know more about the arc, the Bible, the characters in the storyline, talk to me. We welcome collaborators. At the same time, we're sort of in this position where we're kind of putting some boundaries up as we grow this thing with the intention that once the story is out there and it's known, then people are free to take it in their own direction and riff off it. Hollywood, the porn industry, I have no idea. But I mean, let's face it, everything is outside of a creator's control almost from day one anyway. You need a lot of money to enforce intellectual property rights. So typically artists are not getting a great deal. They do better than people may think. The average artist salary, I just learned this, is $43,000 a year. That's slightly above average for the United States. It's less than most developers make, but artists tend to be fairly resilient and fairly entrepreneurial. What they don't tend to have is a great set of resources for actually collaborating on projects. So what we're trying to do, and we would love it if somebody wanted to build something that was more flexible, is just create a quick and dirty way that you can very clearly outline how a franchise would evolve and what rights are available at each stage, and then tie that, say, to crowdfunding. We did an ICO, a very, very small one, to Patreon, to donations. There, you can use the same revenue streams that have been used in the past. Ideally, the crypto boom opens up a few new ones. I don't recommend indie ICOs for other people, just because the SEC came out with some new regulations in the fall, and they're really only recommending the structure for professional investors now. It makes me cry tiny tears. We just got another offering to list our token on a Chinese exchange, and I'm just like, I probably can't do that because we're not at the size. Our initial ask was only $80,000, and that's not the size that you want when you're going to have to be including legal expertise as part of the budget. So again, this is a framework. You could certainly build software around this model for collaboration. I think Git is not bad as a solution. Git and GitHub, you do probably requires a little bit of effort to learn, but the GUI versions are very accessible to non-programmers. It's really most of what the focus of this talk is about is a model and a process, and then specific tools or specific legal licenses grow out of that. And I'll say finally, I think client-side mining is a really interesting idea and a really interesting revenue model potentially for artists, because it can effectively replace advertising, and because it screens out bots. There's no incentive to be a bot if you're having to spend CPU resources to hit a page. I used to not have much of a problem with advertising. It was just sort of a natural, necessary evil. The more that I thought about it, and the more that I ran across small projects that were trying to scramble and come up with a budget to share their ideas and to share their work, nonprofits, small businesses, artists, independent developers, what I realized is that every time you see an ad, there's something else that you're not seeing instead. And certain voices are just getting cut out of the mix because we have a finite amount of attention, we have a finite amount of time. Spaces like this, which are completely open and there is no pay to play, are increasingly rare. So when advertising is annoying, it's mental, psychic, and spiritual pollution. I heard one person say, but it's also it's a real disservice to the greater conversation, because it means that it's very similar to campaign finance. It's if only wealthy politicians can run, or those with wealthy donors, then certain ideas just don't get out there. And increasingly, as we spend more time in online forums, Facebook has had a bad month. Try not to have too much schadenfreude. As we spend time in online forums that are riddled with advertising, we only see this limited subset of ideas and voices and projects. So what's the solution? I think it's just to keep on creating culture and to connect with other people. When you're working on something that's shared, there can be friction points, but it can also be really, really powerful. It provides a great motivation to continue forward. It holds you accountable. You bounce off ideas. I love the feeling of somebody else coming up with something that I couldn't have got to on my own. Whether it's, what would be the right neighborhood in 22nd century Paris for a given restaurant to be in a given limo drive to ride back, or whether it's just, the actual look and feel and visual style of a world. Another huge advantage of working on shared creative projects versus individual ones is you get a built-in audience. As you get to the point where you attract fans and you attract other people who know the stories and know the characters, then guess what? You have to do less work to market your own story and to get your own projects out there. You have that community of collaborators, and you also have that community of followers. So this is nothing new. This is Gilgamesh. This is the Bible, the Judeo-Christian Bible. This is every mythological system ever created. It's a very new and a very 20th century idea that we should be able to box up worlds and stories and say you have to pay to have access to them. So here we are. It is 11:23. We have a few more minutes. And I guess I'll just open things up for questions. Go ahead.
very briefly, what's the state of the projects? The book, the game, the movie, like what's the current state of all those things?
It's all in progress. It is all very much a work in progress. We did a big push at the end of last summer to get the first 80 pages or so of text, which again, they're not the final, it's sort of a representative sample of several plot threads and several stories that interweave. And after that point, we really had to adjust our expectations and our plans drastically when the SEC ruling came down about ICOs. When we just realized what seemed like a format that was very successful and where we'd gotten a lot of positive press, it was just going to be risky for us to do anything that would increase our profile. I mean, an example, I had somebody come to me and want to do co-op advertising. Now advertising for ICOs has been banned. And I was just like, well, I'm not sure this is maybe a good idea because we are just like a bunch of people. We're not a startup or a legal structure. So there's that side of it. The original premise also was more closely tied to crypto. You actually earn currency as you read the story. That's one of the reasons the story kind of morphs and changes over time, is to give people that ability to go back and find something interesting the next time around. Again, it's an interesting technological idea. I've had to put that on hold because we don't really know the legalities of it. They're still getting worked out. We don't want somebody to read through ROSECODE and then end up with a $600 tax bill because the token increased in value or somebody bought the token, at set amount of time. So to get back to your original question, the next iteration of the story, look for significant changes to the website in the next week. There will actually be more content that's posted, but you'll have to do a little bit more work to get to that content. One of the questions that I have to work out and have to talk to the other collaborators about is, would we consider the route of just traditional publishing, work with a science fiction house like Tor, come out with a traditional manuscript in book form first. That's appealing because that's a medium that's known and understood, and there's a built-in audience for it. The downside is that it really limits our ability to put up work online that's accessible free of charge. If you put up an entire manuscript online, it doesn't matter whether it's the most restrictive or the least restrictive version of Creative Commons. Very, very difficult to sell that manuscript to anybody. So I would say stay tuned, come back often. There are updates. I need to set up a mailing list also. Sort of, most of the work of this project has gone into the actual creation. It hasn't necessarily gone into the marketing of it. So that's another area where we have to find a good balance. Shoot.
So this is not a world that I'm involved in specifically, but I know that my girlfriend is involved a lot in the online fanfiction community, specifically the indie fandom. Have you done any outreach with those kinds of communities? Because when I explained the project to her and when I was researching the project before the conference, she was really excited about having the possibility of having an open source franchise that you can profit from and fork if you don't like the direction, or create your own community from there, the same way you have free software.
Exactly.
So this seems like such an ideal solution to a problem that a lot of fanfiction authors run into. And I'm wondering if that's kind of just a future state idea, is that this is going to replace the current model of fanfiction.
Yeah.
And just kind of where it's going to go from there, what's going to happen with the fanfiction community.
We'd love to put it out there for people who are feeling like there's a gap. I mean, I think there will always be Trekkies. I think there will always be people who love these big stories, and there's a lot of just really talented narrative and really amazing material that's coming. I'm not trying to say, at least not in this forum, not today, shut down Hollywood. Oh, like big budget things are bad. But at the same time, what I'm hearing from you and what I suspect, talking to some of my own friends within some of these communities, very informally, is that there is a gap, and there is that desire to create a space where fans just have more control and can do more and can take projects to the next level if they so desire. So I would say, like, yeah, we're very open to it. Bring it on. What we're doing is evolving fast. Hopefully other people can learn from it, learn from our mistakes, learn from what we do well. And, it's a jumping off point. Yeah, go ahead.
So I find it fascinating, and I'm wondering, you say the first step is the novelization. Is there a single writer, or are there multiple writers? I notice you're using Git, so do people write things, commit, send it in for polls, and someone reviews it? And, I mean, I would imagine that would get rather confusing.
Yeah. We at this point, we haven't had to use that structure because it's been much more just people writing sections that are contained with at most one other collaborator working on the same material. So it's been easy enough just to do track changes. That said, one of the things that's really intriguing to me, especially for any kind of continuity and timeline, is a tool like Git, because you can just add things and create a history. And I realized this even going back over the material and trying to collate it all and being like, wait, in what year does what happen? Have we left anything out? And getting a formal repository which stores that information, stores a database of characters, so then you know somebody's hair color, you know somebody's background roughly. That's the next stage, and it's a project I'd love to embark on. I think it would be really interesting.
And then, side on that, so you say it's constantly changing and evolving, so, and you have to go back to it.
Yeah.
Is the novel changing as well? So if you read a chapter 1 week, 2 weeks later, are there going to be changes to what happened there?
Well, the novel, anything that comes out in print form or comes out in a Kindle is going to be very fixed, and it's going to read in more of like a straightforward, you read the first chapter, there's a hook, you're like, oh my God, what happens next? You want to read more, ideally. We hope people find it interesting. In terms of, it's there's sort of the format of games. There's the format of going back to the old Infocom games, where you head west, you head north, you head right. There are a lot of approaches to interactive fiction. I think our approach is to create something that's fresh, that feels fresh each time you come back to it, but also feels accessible. And to give people ways to interact with the story and sort of sleuth and uncover more content, decode simple puzzles, but at the same time have that not be something that's so jarring that it takes you out of the story and distracts. So, go ahead.
Yeah, so you had talked about derivative works, but
Yeah.
say a movie studio could take that. Does that derivative work also allow further derivative works? I mean, it seems like a studio could take it and then close it off and keep going.
Well, they could definitely do that with their own fork. I mean, what's being envisioned for number 3 down there, release the ROSECODE story in movie form. It's equivalent to the MIT license, I would say.
Okay.
So it's something for people who know what that is. It's something where you can take the code is made completely accessible. You can take any part of what's released under that license and you can adapt it, and then you can add your own new stuff onto that, and you can build a wall around it if you want. Although I think it would be very difficult, for instance, to trademark characters that came out.
Right, I was worried that they would go after other derivative works.
Yeah.
From the same source.
I mean, it's something where, I mean, it would be fun for lawyers. I think lawyers, big studios would be at a disadvantage, and they would probably get a lot of pushback from their community. But again, it's something where if you sort of, you had this Rose Code universe, and you decided you're going to come up with this brand new character, Pineapple Man. And Pineapple Man is set in the Rose Code universe. It's a crossover. Pineapple Man has the power of like shooting pineapples out, in every direction out of his wrists and arms. That character, as I understood it, a major studio or corporation could protect it if they wanted to, and could license that under a more restrictive work. But if they had a story where Pineapple Man interacted with one of the core Rose Code characters, they wouldn't have any claim to those characters or those parts of the world. Go ahead.
The movie, what is your plan for that? Is that going to be structured somewhat like the Blender movies that that community does, or is it going to be more centralized, or like how are you thinking?
I think it really depends who comes to us at this point and what their vision is. We're very open, I would say, but we want it to be good, and we want it to be. I think whatever comes first, it may not have the highest budget, but I think it's going to be defining in a lot of ways. Anything else? Well, thanks, guys. There is a repo. I think there's a slide about that. Yeah, the Python code is not up on the repo yet because I need to get it to work with Lambda. That's sort of what rescrambles the text and the imagery and the content in different ways. So, and several people involved have also done private forks. So, if you're just like, oh, this is a bunch of static files, like, let's talk more. But yeah, follow us online. You can follow me at Thematizer. That's the easiest way to contact me. The RoseCode Twitter page is RoseCode8410, and you can find all the social media and the GitHub through the website as well.